Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast. My guest today is Professor Francine Dolins. She's an associate professor of psychology at University of Michigan-Dearborn in the Department of Behavioral Sciences. So she teaches courses on animal behavior, animal intelligence, experimental psychology, and supervises the student research. So I think this will be a really interesting call. So welcome, Francine. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, tell me about your interest in all things animal. What kind of research are you doing at this moment? What kind of animals?
So I mostly study non-human primates. Sometimes I get some humans in there, but I'm mostly non-human primates. I study them in the lab and in the field. So I worked with South American monkeys, cotton-top tamarins, and mustache tamarins in the wild. And I've worked with lemurs in the wild and in free-ranging conditions. And I've worked with great apes, so chimpanzees and bonobos, and then of course human is another.
That's really cool. I can picture like those mustache ones looking at you, and you have something in your hand, they grab it out of your hand and they're eating it. I'm sure I've seen that from footage. The lemurs with their gigantic eyes, and you must have stared into the eyes of some very strange creatures. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't. Tamarins don't grab things out of our hands. They're not all that like human centric. But lemurs definitely, the ones that are used to humans will come over and grab stuff out of our hands or jump on our shoulder, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, they're weird. Yeah, I remember we went to a zoo and they had lemurs, and my daughter had actually a service dog with her, and the lemurs all came to the edge of the cage and were staring. And I said to my wife, they must be like, what the hell is that thing? It was just very funny. At home we have dogs and cats, and sometimes they get along with each other, sometimes they ignore each other. I just always wonder what animals think of other animals and, what they know about them,
Yeah. I remember when we moved to Great Britain, we brought our 2 dogs with us, and we had rented a house that had a field next to us with cows, and our dogs, we let them out in the front yard. And for the very first time in their lives, they saw cows, and they were just stock still staring. They couldn't believe the size of these animals. And the cows were just very friendly, came over and sort of looked at them and wanted to be friendly. But the dogs were just like, oh my God, what's that? So yeah, I do think sometimes when they see animals, they don't know that they are completely shocked.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
But so what are you studying about animal cognition? What kind of things are you trying to ascertain?
So my area was originally spatial cognition. So how do animals learn about space? How do they learn to navigate? How do they remember where to go? Where to find food, where to avoid predators, where to find water and good sleeping sites, find other mates, avoid other groups. So basically anything about space. And, they say, if you have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. If you study spatial cognition, everything looks spatial. So even social interactions. So I also study social interactions and social cognition. And part of that has spatial aspects to it. But my field work was really following animals around, following primates around, different primates, and seeing where they went and identifying that they ate at this fruit tree and they ate this much at this fruit tree at this time of day. And then how did they get back there the next day? Did they take the same route or did they take a different route? And in captivity, I realized from field studies that it's really hard to know what the animals are looking at. And so if we could set something up in captivity to see what is it that they are populating their mental maps with, their memories with, then we could control that and we could manipulate it and see and understand more about how they're creating these mental maps. So I started to work on virtual reality and giving the animals, it's touchscreen virtual reality, so they don't wear headsets, but working with grade 8 so that they navigate around in virtual space to see, one, how close is that to actual navigation in the real world, but two, can we test their spatial cognitive skills and then also social cognitive skills using virtual reality? So those are the things that I've been working on.
Well, what have you noticed about how they see the world versus people? I know it's a general question, but what's jumped out at you from the research, like surprising or cool observations?
I guess surprising and cool things. Well, very quickly, you asked me compared to humans. So overall, non-human primates have amazing spatial memory. Not all of them, not every species. I don't know. I haven't tested them all, but majority of the ones who I've tested have amazing spatial memories, and they can get back to certain locations from lots of different directions. So they seem to understand where things are located, and then they can kind of bushwhack across their environment to get there. And they
How are they identifying that? By spatially calculating where stuff is, or is it by smell?
not by smell, because their smell is about the same as ours. And, if we had to travel half a mile, we wouldn't be able to smell where, our favorite donut shop was. But the same as us, they use landmarks, visual landmarks, but also distance by effort. So how far do I have to travel to get to here, to this place? How many steps do I have to take? But mostly by landmarks. So they'll have certain landmarks that they'll go to that are these kinds of nodes in the forest. And sort of like, if you think about, I always relate it to New York City. But if, you're going to go and change trains on a subway, you go to 33rd Street or you go to 42nd Street and you get to a node and you change trains and you change direction. So you sort of know where you are in relation to these nodes. And that's what they do. They find certain locations in the environment they recognize, and then they change directions to get to that other place that they want to get to. So they'll have certain legs of journeys, if you think of it. So, I go in a straight line here, get to node 1, I go in a straight line here, I get to node 2, and I go in another straight line to node 3, and then I know that the foraging site that I want to get to is off to my left, and it's sort of about probably 30 meters. And so I, use my distance by effort to get there, and that's how they navigate.
What about error correction? Do you see them doing that? Like, have you ever been able to put them, you guys really a life-size maze where things move around, but I don't know, could you recreate that with terrain somehow? Where they'd be getting a conflicting signal, they got to check and see where they went wrong.
They don't often go wrong, surprisingly, and they don't backtrack. So they seem to know where they're going. They might get to a fruit tree and find that it's already emptied by some other group or by birds, some other competitor organism, but they don't usually make mistakes. That's what I've seen.
Have you tried distracting them? Someone comes and gives them food or put something out there in the terrain that's interesting to them, a food stuff or something, or maybe a noise gets produced and takes their attention for a minute, so they get right back on track. Have you tried that?
Yeah, we've done field experiments where we provide them with platforms with food where they have to come, and they use landmarks that we provide, that this platform is baited and that platform isn't. So we've done that. We changed it so that it's a temporal pattern. So they have to remember where food is located on a temporal basis, not on a visual basis. They have to remember that. And we've tried to do it also by smell up close, that would they recognize where baited food is by smell. They're not very good. They're no better than we are at identifying where food is located by smell. But they incorporate those platforms into their daily paths. And so it doesn't seem to even throw them that, okay, we've got a new feeding site, and we just go here and there's some tricky things about the timing or the location of where food is located, and they just incorporate that into their daily pattern. So it's really hard to trick them. In fact, they're really smart about these things, and they're very, very efficient. They don't waste a lot of time and energy going to places that food isn't available.
What about the complexity of the route? They're like an upper limit after which like it's too complex for them and they have to give up, or they just don't know where to go?
That's a good question. I don't know if anybody has asked that question. The routes are relatively complex in that they will have certain feeding sites that they'll go to from different locations using nodes in the forest, as I mentioned, that are seasonal. So during sort of a 3-month period when certain fruits are available, they'll go to those locations and use those nodes because those nodes have landmarks that make sense to them. But then as the season changes, they have to switch to different feeding sites. And so they have to develop new nodes and new feeding sites. So these feeding sites might be places that they go to over years. So they might have gone to that fruiting tree last year when it was when it had fruit on it, but they haven't been there for 3/4 of a year. But there might be other trees that have come up with fruit that are different. So they have to kind of coordinate all of that and also explore. So I don't know that anyone has determined that, it's sort of like we understand short-term memory, 7 plus or minus 2, that other than that, you can't really hold, not many people can hold many more items in their memory than that. And that would be a sort of upper limit, for example, for non-human primates in foraging, that they can only have 7 halves and that's it. I don't think anyone's found anything like that, but it's a really good question.
But what about males that are like dominant within their group versus like lower level males or females? Do they navigate differently?
That's a really good question as well, and something that I'm very interested in. So the sex differences in cognition and in spatial cognition. So interestingly, if we take chimpanzees as an example, chimpanzees split up into small male bands to travel around, and then the females usually travel independently with their offspring. So it's usually one female with 1 or 2 offspring with her, and then the males are in groups of 3, 4, 5 individuals traveling around their home ranges. And they're not only finding food, but the males are also patrolling the territory to make sure that other groups are not making inroads into their home range. The females aren't doing that, but they are crisscrossing to get to lower quality foods because the males generally take the higher quality foods. So in fact, if we look at what the males and females are doing, we would project or predict that the females should probably have better spatial cognitive skills because they're looking for lower quality foods. They have to find more places, and they're feeding 3 individuals, sometimes 4, that are dependent on them. In a small male band, there might be multiple individuals who might have this spatial knowledge of where things are. And so they're not reliant on one individual to navigate. In fact, we don't know very much. We don't know who's leading those small male band group. It could be that there's one individual. It could be that there's multiple individuals. But given that there are multiple adults in there, they could all be leading at different points. And their job is find the best quality food and control the home range and make sure no one comes in, no other groups come in. So they have a different spatial responsibility in that regard. But if we look at the predictions, it would suggest that the females should have slightly better spatial cognitive skills than the males. And so far, in my limited testing, I can't say that I have a huge number of captive chimpanzees who I've tested, but of those who I've tested, I say that the females are slightly better than the male on spatial skills. With bonobos, it's slightly different because they have a whole different ecology. They're also a chimpanzee species, but they live in much more cohesive groups. And they also sometimes split into smaller groups when they're foraging, but the foods that they're foraging on are much more prevalent. So it's not as hard for them to find food. So, and also one other major social difference between the two species, is that chimpanzees are a male dominant species, whereas in bonobos, the females are dominant. So the females might get access to the better food and so on than the males. Not always, but it could happen. And so they have this different environment, a different social structure, and different ways of navigating. So if we were going to make predictions about the bonobos between males and females, we would say that their spatial cognitive skills should be about equal. Whereas with the chimpanzees, the prediction would be that the females should be slightly better than the male spatial skills. And with humans, it's a really interesting comparison because we are what we consider to be a male-dominant species if we can compare ourselves to other primate species. And interestingly, on spatial tasks, males have performed better, but often the spatial tasks that females would perform better on are not ones that are often given to females or in tests. So for instance, our sort of quintessential IQ test that has the mental object rotation tasks in it, males always do better on those kinds of tasks when they've had a lot of exposure to mental object rotation tasks. And females are often not given that in their education. And then those are used in IQ tests. And so females don't do as well on IQ tests and they don't do as well on these mental object rotation tasks. Whereas if you gave both males and female human embedded figures tasks, the females would do a whole lot better than the male, but those are not in IQ tests. So it's very interesting. And
What about tasks that involve math or counting? 1, 2, 3 many, or 1 too many, or that. Maybe they get a bunch of fruits and there's 10 of them in the tribe. They want to divvy it up between, and they have to do a little bit of math to make sure everyone gets the same. So they do any of that stuff?
Well, humans definitely do that. There are collectivist societies, hunter-gatherer groups that do that with humans. With non-humans, there are a number of studies that have looked at, well, certainly do they understand differences between 1, 3, 5, or many. And the chimpanzees that have been studied in bonobos, they definitely understand. Dogs also seem to understand, more or less. So there's different species, some bird species have been tested on that. So there are many animals that do understand more or less or fewer, if you want. With regard to exact number, there have been some really nice studies done with chimpanzees that show that they do understand certain numbers, like 5 is greater than 3, and so on. I'm not sure. With counting, there's really wonderful study with chimpanzees being able to count, and they can identify that not only the numbers, but they can identify them when they're spatially organized, and they remember where the location of each number is. And those are really astounding, and they're better than human.
What if you have a series of 10 by 10 cubbies with a piece of fruit in it or something, and I guess you either have to count to where something is. Let's say it's kind of near the middle. Spatially, it might be really hard to do that because there's so many holes that all look the same for cubbies.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been able to do testing where the only way to really find the right cubby is to count it? 5 up and 3 across or something?
I'm trying to think. There have been a few. There's been one study that I can think of that's sort of like that. It's much smaller, and that was with monkeys, not with apes. And they were able to solve the task, but it was a much smaller array. I did something like that when I was doing my Ph.D., but I was using landmarks to identify where certain hidden food was in an array of 9 by 9. No, 8 by 8. It was 8 by 8 in that experiment. And so they had to use the spatial relationship between the landmarks in order to identify holes that didn't have any landmarks around them. So that would have been hard. So they had to, maybe count in 2 over from this landmark and 3 over from that landmark. But then I would rotate the landmarks, and then they had to still find where the food was hidden in relation to that. So in that regard, it might have been counting, but we don't know how they solved the problem. We just know that they did solve the problem.
Okay. Interesting. I don't know. Have you done much work with dogs? Or I'm trying to relate everything to monkeys, all the questions, but I've questions about dogs. I don't know if you they can be related, but
I own dogs. I have pet dogs, but I don't study them. But I study them, I guess, anecdotally.
Yeah, I'll ask you about that. What if I had bottles of hundreds and hundreds of different smells, and every day I opened up 2, 3 bottles and had my dog smell it. So over a year, let's say I introduced 1,000 new smells. What do you think that would do to the dog's brain? Would the smells have to be repeated? What would happen if you kept exposing him to more and more different smells?
I don't know what the upper limit of dog olfactory memory is, but I imagine it would be quite high because they have such sensitive olfactory skills and perception. Unlike ours, it's 1,000,000 times better than ours. And so I don't know. That's probably.
Yeah, and supposedly they smell like individual ingredients in like soups and, and mixtures. So that's why I thought, what would happen if you keep introducing them to all kinds of crazy smells, like, I don't know. I just wonder how it affects. I don't even know how you test stuff.
I mean,
What would it do to them after a while?
You get a response from them to show that they understand that this is the smell. I mean, I can imagine setting up experiments to do something like that, but I don't know. It's not something that I've studied before, and I don't study dogs, so I don't know. But and primates generally have this sort of same sense of smell that we do, which is sort of like okay in the animal kingdom. It's not a great sense of smell. It's just their okay smell.
Well, another thing too, like, I mean, it's going to apply to apes too, is I don't think there are any bad smells for, at least for dogs. Like I've never seen them, I've seen them go like, and be curious about something or not, but I don't think they say, oh, that smells terrible or that smells really good. They just seem to like, okay, it's a smell, like it's either food or not food, interesting or not interesting, but I don't see them reacting like we would. I just wonder if the apes are the same way. Are there like things that they literally they hate, or if they just like passively like, oh, yes, no, good or bad?
Yeah, well, they have very strong individual preferences. So one might like mango and the other one hates mango. And if you hand them a piece of lettuce, one piece of lettuce, they'll like it and the other one might not like it. Some like carrots, some don't. I mean, so yeah, they have their...
How do they show they like? Do they just ignore the food, or they literally will throw it down or get mad? Or
Well, you can certainly ask them like what things they like, especially if you're working with great apes who have been lexigram trained. So they have little pictograms that they use on a board, and you can ask them, so, would you like this, or of these three choices, which one would you like most? And we've done preference tests like that, with fruit, and they definitely have preferences. And you can also see, when there's food scattered around for them to eat, that they will go for certain individuals. If you watch them carefully, one individual might go and pick up the carrots, another individual might pick up the red pepper, and another individual might pick out the apple. So that there's definite preferences when they're given options. But we can also ask them just like, what do you like? Do you like this or this? And then they can point to the lexicograms and tell us, I like this. Or sometimes they'll go and ask, they'll say, I want grapes, even though we're offering them banana. Like, I want grapes. You're like, well, have any grapes today? How about apple? And then they'll say, no, orange. And then we'll say, okay, well, we have some oranges. We'll go get you some oranges. So they'll tell us what they like and what they want. I had one chimpanzee, he used to request brown bread, which I always thought was funny.
What about how they say yes and no? Do they actively like say no to certain things, or yes, or it's either, I don't know, like how do you experience them saying yes and no?
Well, with the great apes, it's very different than, say, a monkey. With great apes, and the ones who I've worked with have been very enculturated, worked with humans for many years. So they will often use a nod or a shake of their head, or if they like something, using their own gesture, which is to shake their hand. So bonobos will often do they'll point the back of their hand at you and then kind of shake it up and down very quickly. And that's a kind of like, it's often a hello, but it's also like, yeah, I like that. Like, and sometimes they will clap, but, so I could ask them a question, do you want this? And they may nod, but they may also do a hand, like, shaking the back of their hand at me. But they also might clap their hands. But that's something that the clap is probably something that they've learned. I don't know that they do that in the wild.
Yeah, they're relating it again to dogs. Like, I'm sure you've seen with your dog, some things they eat right away. Some things, like, as a courtesy, they'll open their mouth slowly, and I'll put it in there, and they'll hold it with their teeth and just drop it on the floor. They don't really want it. But like, I've seen toddlers, like my kids, when they were younger, they would go, yeah, and just spit it right out if they don't want it, But it's funny how dogs do it. They like kind of polite about it. I wonder what, apes do.
Well, I think the dogs are taking it in their mouth, getting a sense of the taste and the texture and deciding. And then I don't know that it's really polite. I think it's just, am I able to eat this? And no, I don't want that. When we first got one of our dogs, our other dog ate a lot of different fruits and vegetables. Then we tried our new dog on it. He was just ravenous. He didn't eat anything right away. And it became very selective. He was like, no, I don't think I really like celery. No, I don't think I really like apple. I think, broccoli's okay and carrot's okay. And then carrot became his favorite thing. He would love to have carrot, but if you offered him a piece of broccoli, he would be like, you must be crazy. I'm not taking that. And so, it was interesting, but he became selective, over time about what he would eat.
Yeah, they had, dogs. One of them loved fish, any fish that loved, and then the other ones, they just wanted meat. But some of them will eat anything. And it's just funny, how they are. I tried to give a little bit of wasabi to the dogs, and one of them curled it wasn't a snarl, but she curled her lips in this really weird way where you could see her teeth and like backed away. So I put the wasabi near her again, and she did that. It was such a strange response. I never seen. It must have been like,
it was probably an olfactory response rather than a snarl or anything. It was probably that this was, I don't quite know, but almost a way of protecting their nasal passages from the smell. Yes.
It was weird. They made a very strange face curling of their lips in a weird way. So, can you train? I mean, I know you don't know exactly, but has anyone used lexicograms to train dogs? Can they learn that or no?
Yes, they have dog tiles now. Well, they also use it for cats. So they have these tiles that you can program and the dogs can use them. And there's a really lovely study going on by a colleague of mine, Federico Rosano, where he has like 30,000 citizen scientists who are sharing data with their dog tiles and it looks like from the data that the dogs really understand that they're, saying, when is dad coming home? Or, I want to go out now, or surprise outside when an ambulance goes by, or, things like that. So they seem to be able to comment on what's going on around them and things that they need and things that they want in the future. So it's really fascinating.
Does anyone ever have like a tile for an ape or a dog? Let's say with the ape. So a picture of an ape and a picture of a person, and then you point to somebody and then they pick the right tile?
Yes. So we have lexicograms with name. And in fact, I'm doing a study on naming, proper naming in grade 8 that's related to that question. But we can give them, there are lexicograms that have individuals' names and it has their lexigram image, right? So it's a little line drawing of some kind. And then the ape can choose, if you say, who do you want to play with? They can point at that lexigram and say, Sally or whatever. I want to play with Sally.
They know names can be associated with apes and people?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And they certainly know
cool.
name by listening and their own name by lexigram. Yeah.
Interesting. So if you have a group of apes, you can say like, Joey, or make a symbol or something, and they'll know that particular one's being called.
Yes.
It's cool. It's probably elementary, but it makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, if you have 2 dogs and you say, I don't know what your dog's names are. Do you have 2 dogs?
We have 5.
5 dogs. Okay. So what are their names?
Goji, one of them I call him, his name is morphed a lot, but his name is Julius. Another was Napoleon. So then there's the other is Velvet. And the fourth one is, my daughter calls him Mini Nana. His name is Midas, but he's like a smaller version of the other one. So somehow she came up with Mini Nana. So that's his name.
So if you call one of them, some of their ears might perk up a little bit because they're like, wait, if Mini Nana is getting a treat, why don't I get a treat, right? They might do that. But if you call one after they had a long day running around, just one of their ears, the individual you're calling will probably lift their head and look at you, and the others probably wouldn't look at you.
Their tail goes. Sometimes it's like, they all seem to be interested. Sometimes, right, it's individual ones too.
Yeah. So yeah, I had, we designed a study based on actually one of my dogs, and my poor dog, Waldo, he passed away in August. But he was a brilliant dog, and he was very much of a rule maker in our house. So much so that when we have 5 cats. So at the time when this was happening, we had 5 cats, and one of them had diabetes. And so she was, even though we gave her insulin and checked her regularly, she would still try to steal others' food because she was always hungry. We had to be careful. So we would tell her, no, Willa, when she tried to steal food from somebody else. And each of the 5 cats had their own bowl, and Waldo would run over to Willa and push her out of the way if she tried to eat out of somebody else's bowl. And we wouldn't even necessarily be looking at her. We might just call it out because we're busy with our hands doing something. And Waldo would take the rule in charge and push her out of the way. And she was not happy about, actually, he would boot her in her bottom. So she didn't like his big nose kind of pushing her bottom around. So she would kind of listen to him if he came over. But it was always interesting to see. And sometimes she would sneak over and try to steal his food when he wasn't eating it, because he ate very slowly. And one of the ways that we could get him to eat his own food was to say, "No, Willa," looking at his bowl, just staring at his bowl. And he would come running over and sniff his bowl to see if she'd been there. Yeah, it was really kind of funny. And we would encourage him to finish his breakfast or his dinner, whatever it was. But then at one point, Willa, when she was about 13 years old, her diabetes was getting out of control and she passed on very sadly. And so she wasn't there anymore. And the day after she passed away, Waldo was doing his same thing where he was eating very slowly and not eating his food. And so I called out to him, "No, Willa," looking at his bowl. And he slowly ambled over, looked at his bowl and looked at me like, "Did you just make that up?" And I sort of like tried to encourage him to eat. And the next day I did the same thing. I called out, I said, "No, Willa," looking at his bowl. And he didn't even come over. And I tried it a third day and lift his head that time. So what I understood from that was he knew that the entity named Willa, not just that cat, not just that there was a missing individual, but that particular cat was no longer with us. I mean, whether he understood death or she disappeared, I don't know, but he knew she wasn't there and that he didn't have to respond to the name Willa anymore. And that told me that he had a memory of an individual, of an entity, regardless of whether he saw her or not, that was an individual called Willa. And that was really fascinating to me. And so we designed a whole set of experiments between me and my colleagues, Diana Rees and Brenda McCowan, and another colleague, Carrie Figdor, studying that in dolphins and studying that in bonobos. So we've been using that paradigm.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah, it is. And so you can learn a lot from, as I said, anecdotally watching your dogs. But I don't study them per se, but I watch them very carefully.
Okay. Well, any current experimentation or future that you're really excited to see the results of you can talk about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Gosh, I've got a bunch of experiments going on. So with that study, the proper naming study, I'm really excited. So that's taking a little while to train the bonobos on some of the training parts, but we're soon getting close to the proper naming part. We're doing a study on social cognition, looking at whether or not individuals can understand the reputation of another individual as a cooperator or as a competitor, and will they choose them when they have to do a task that requires sharing that task in order to get a food reward. So in order to do this study, I worked for about 2 years. It took a long time, and we're still refining them. I created bonobo avatars. Well, meaning I found programmers who are very, very talented, and they've created bonobo avatars that really, really look like the bonobos themselves. So we've designed 7 bonobo avatars that look like the bonobos who I work with, and 7 bonobos who I know that they would never have met in their lives. And so we have 14 bonobo avatars, and we're introducing that into our virtual reality program so that we have individuals who they know, individuals who they don't know. And for individuals who they don't know, we create the reputations of cooperators or competitors. And then we see we've done a little bit of this in pilot study. And so far, they are distinguishing between cooperators and competitors, but we now are introducing the avatars, these bonobo avatars, to see if they can choose between those individuals. And very, very interested to see the results of that. That's one study. And another study that we're doing or going to do also with the avatars is, and this is kind of, I think, really cool, using motion capture with a human who has studied, a scientist, fellow primatologist who has studied chimpanzees and bonobos in the wild. And she is probably the most conversant in chimp and bonobo gestures of anybody in the world. And so she is going to replicate these gestures in a motion capture studio. And we're going to use the motion capture and upload that into our avatars and then present those gestures to captive ape to see how they respond to them. So these are wild ape gestures being presented to captive ape.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
So I'm really excited about that.
Well, very cool. Well, I think you talked about a lot. What's the best place for people to follow your research and find out more?
Well, ResearchGate is one place. I have a Google Scholars site. I'm always updating it. Then there's lots of papers coming out from the team who I work with, because I don't work alone. I have lots and lots of very, very talented colleagues who I work with. So usually different journals, primate journals, comparative psychology journals, but mostly if they look on the ResearchGate website or the Google Scholar website, they should find out where my most recent papers are coming out.
Okay, well, very good. Well, thanks so much for coming on the call. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And it's been so interesting talking with you. And I love that you have 5 dogs.
And it's 4 cats.
Oh my gosh. How many humans live in your house?
Oh, 5. The average around 4 or 5.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.